Most people start raising chickens with one simple idea in mind: fresh eggs, better food, maybe even a little more independence from the grocery store. But after a few months, one problem becomes very obvious. The chickens may be small, but the feed bill is not. A flock that looks affordable in the beginning can slowly turn into a weekly expense that eats away at the entire purpose of keeping chickens in the first place. And this is where many beginners make the same mistake. They think the answer is simply to buy more feed, store more bags, or accept the cost as part of the system. But that is not the only option. The real goal is not to starve your flock or cut corners so hard that egg production collapses. The goal is to make every pound of feed work harder, while replacing part of that feed with resources you may already have around you. Kitchen scraps, garden surplus, pasture, insects, bulk buying, better measuring, simple soaking or fermentation. These small changes can make a serious difference, especially if feed prices are rising or if you are trying to keep chickens on a tight budget. But there is one important rule before we go any further. Saving money should never mean feeding unsafe food. Some older backyard advice says chickens can eat almost anything. And while chickens are excellent foragers, they are not garbage disposals. Moldy food, rotten scraps, very salty leftovers, alcohol, chocolate, caffeine, avocado pits and skins, and green potato parts should stay out of the chicken pen. A cheaper feed bill is not worth sick chickens, poor laying, or long-term health problems. So in this guide, I want to walk through 7 practical ways to reduce your chicken feed bill without turning your flock into a problem. Some methods are very simple. You can start them today, like measuring the feed instead of pouring by habit. Some take a little planning, like buying in bulk or growing extra greens. And some require observation, because every flock is different. A dozen laying hens in a small backyard will not eat exactly like chickens moved across fresh pasture every few days. Chicks, laying hens, meat chickens, and older hens all have different nutritional needs. So the question is not, how little can I feed them? The better question is this: how much of their diet can I provide intelligently, safely, and cheaply before I ever open another bag of feed? The first way to cut your chicken feed bill is also one of the most overlooked. Use kitchen scraps. But use them wisely. In many homes, perfectly useful food goes into the trash every day. A little cooked rice, vegetable ends, overripe fruit, soft tomatoes, pumpkin pieces, wilted greens, leftover plain pasta, small amounts of cooked meat or fish. For chickens, many of these scraps are not waste. They are calories, moisture, texture, and variety. And when used correctly, they can replace a meaningful portion of the commercial feed you would otherwise buy. But there is a difference between feeding kitchen scraps and dumping garbage into the chicken run. That difference matters. Chickens can handle a wide range of foods, but they should not be treated like a disposal bin for anything old, spoiled, or questionable. Moldy bread, rotten fruit, sour-smelling leftovers, food covered in fungus, or anything that looks unsafe should not go to the flock. Mold can produce toxins that are dangerous to chickens, even if they seem willing to peck at it. The same goes for very salty foods, heavily fried leftovers, sugary desserts, chocolate, caffeine, alcohol, avocado skins and pits, and green potato peels or sprouts. These are not smart feed-saving strategies. They are risks. A better approach is to keep a small container in the kitchen for chicken-safe scraps, fruit peels, cooked grains, leafy greens, vegetable trimmings, squash or pumpkin, a few pieces of cooked egg, a little leftover meat from dinner, as long as it is fresh and not heavily seasoned. Then, once a day, offer those scraps in an amount the flock can clean up fairly quickly. If food is still sitting there many hours later, especially in warm weather, you gave too much. Leftover wet food can attract flies, rats, and bad smells. So it is better to feed smaller amounts more often than to overload the pen. The key is balance. Kitchen scraps should reduce the feed bill, not replace nutrition completely. A laying hen still needs protein, energy, minerals, and especially calcium to keep producing strong eggs. If kitchen scraps become the entire diet, egg production may drop, shells may become thin, and the flock may start missing nutrients that a balanced feed normally provides. So think of kitchen scraps as a pressure valve. They lower the amount of purchased feed you need. They turn household waste into eggs. They add variety to the diet. And they make the chicken system more efficient. But they work best when the flock still has access to a balanced ration, clean water, grit if needed, and calcium for laying hens. Used this way, kitchen scraps are not just a cheap trick. They are one of the simplest ways to turn waste into value. The second way to reduce your chicken feed bill is to stop thinking of the garden as food for people only. A garden can also feed the flock. And in many cases, it does not take much extra effort. If you are already growing lettuce, kale, chard cabbage, pumpkins, squash, sweet potatoes, cucumbers, or tomatoes, you may be producing more chicken feed than you realize. The outer leaves, damaged fruit, overgrown greens, bug-bitten vegetables, and harvest extras can all become part of the chicken diet. This is especially useful because gardens often produce in waves. One week, you have a reasonable amount of greens. The next week, everything bolts, gets too big, or ripens faster than your family can eat. Instead of letting that surplus rot in the soil or sit in the compost pile, you can redirect some of it to the chickens. They turn those extra leaves and fruits into manure, movement, eggs, and eventually a more productive system. That is the beautiful part. What looks like waste in one place becomes value somewhere else. For example, if you grow more lettuce than you can eat, it is not a failure. It is backup feed. The same is true for soft squash, bruised fruit, beet greens, carrot tops, or extra herbs. Chickens will not eat every plant with the same enthusiasm, but they will usually pick through what they want and leave what they do not. Still, there needs to be some caution. Do not feed plants you cannot identify. Do not assume every leaf in the garden is safe. And do not throw unknown plants to hungry chickens with no other food available. Well-fed chickens with choices are more likely to avoid plants they dislike. Hungry chickens are more likely to eat whatever is in front of them. A simple solution is to grow a small chicken patch. This can be a bed or corner planted with hardy greens, fast-growing cover crops, herbs, and squash vines. You can cut from it regularly and carry the greens to the flock. Or you can let the chickens into the area for short controlled periods when the plants are established. The goal is not to replace all purchased feed with garden leaves. The goal is to reduce pressure on the feed bag. Every basket of greens, every pumpkin you did not have to buy, every handful of garden surplus is one more piece of nutrition that did not come from the store. And over a season, those small pieces add up. The third way to cut your chicken feed bill is simple, but it can feel surprisingly uncomfortable at first. Stop feeding by guesswork. Many chicken keepers fill the feeder whenever it looks low. They pour a little more in the morning, a little more in the evening, and assume that if the chickens are eating it, they must need it. But chickens do not always eat neatly. They scratch. They spill. They fling feed out of the feeder. They pick their favorite pieces first and leave the rest behind. And if too much feed is available all the time, part of your money may not be feeding chickens at all. It may be feeding mice, wild birds, insects, or the soil under the feeder. That is why measuring the feed ration matters. Measuring does not mean starving the flock. It means knowing roughly how much feed your chickens actually need, then adjusting based on their condition, age, season, and production. For mature laying hens, a useful reference point is around 100 to 150 grams of feed per hen per day. In American measurements, that is roughly a quarter pound per hen per day. So if you have 10 laying hens, your flock may easily eat about 1 to 1.5 kilograms of feed every day. That means 30 to 45 kilograms of feed in a month. And that is before you count waste. So if even a small amount is spilled, scratched into the dirt, or eaten by pests every day, the cost becomes much bigger over time. Of course, this number is not a fixed rule for every flock. A small lightweight laying breed may eat less than a heavy dual-purpose chicken. Cold weather can increase feed needs. Hot weather can reduce appetite. Chickens with access to pasture, insects, garden greens, and kitchen scraps may need less purchased feed than chickens kept in a bare run. So the practical method is this. Measure once, then make it easy. Use a kitchen scale or feed scale to weigh the amount you want to give for the whole flock. After that, pour it into the scoop, bucket, or container you normally use and mark the level. From then on, you do not need to weigh the feed every day. You already know where the line is. This one habit can stop a surprising amount of waste. If the flock cleans up the feed quickly and still has access to greens, kitchen scraps, pasture, or other forage, that may be fine. If the chickens are fighting aggressively, losing weight, or egg production drops sharply, the feed ration may be too low. If feed is still sitting around at the end of the day, getting wet, attracting pests, or being scattered everywhere, the feed ration may be too high. The flock will give you feedback. Your job is to watch. Also pay attention to the feeder itself. Some feeders waste more than others. A poorly designed open container can lose a lot of feed simply because chickens scratch it out. Raising the feeder to the height of the chickens' backs, using a treadle feeder, or switching to a less spill-prone design can save money without changing the diet at all. The point is not to be extreme. The point is to stop feeding blind. Once you measure the feed, you can manage it, and once you manage it, you can finally see where the waste is happening. The fourth way to reduce your chicken feed bill is to make the feed you already buy more efficient. One of the simplest methods is soaking. Some people take it one step further and lightly ferment the feed, but even basic soaking can help in a practical way. Dry grains and pellets can be dusty, hard, and easy for chickens to scatter. Once they are soaked, the feed becomes heavier, softer, and less likely to be wasted by scratching and flicking. That alone can save money. But there is another reason people use this method. When grains and seeds are soaked, some of the compounds that make nutrients harder to access may begin to break down. In simple terms, the feed can become easier for chickens to digest. This does not magically double the value of the feed, but it can help the flock use more of what you already paid for. The basic process is very simple. Take the amount of feed your flock will eat in one day. Put it in a clean bucket or container. Cover it with clean water. Stir it so there are no dry pockets. Let it sit for about 12 to 24 hours. By the next feeding, the grains or pellets should be soft and fully hydrated. Before serving, drain off extra liquid if there is too much. The feed should be moist, not swimming in dirty water. If you want to build a routine, prepare tomorrow's feed right after you feed today's batch. That way, there is always one container soaking while the flock is eating the previous one. This system works best with whole grains, cracked grains, or coarse feed. Very fine mash can become thick and messy, so you may need to experiment with the amount of water and the soaking time. Now, there is one warning that matters more than all the rest. Do not feed anything that smells rotten, looks moldy, or has turned slimy in a bad way. A slightly sour smell from proper fermentation is different from a foul, spoiled smell. If you are unsure, throw it out. Saving a few cents of feed is not worth risking the health of the flock. Also, keep the containers clean. Rinse them often, especially in hot weather. Feed that ferments too long in a dirty bucket can become a problem instead of a solution. Soaked feed is not a miracle trick. It will not replace a balanced diet, but it can reduce waste, improve texture, help chickens eat more completely, and stretch each bag a little further. And when feed costs are high, even small improvements matter. The fifth way to lower your chicken feed cost is to look at how you buy the feed, not just how you use it. Because sometimes the price problem is not only in the flock. It is in the bag size. Small bags are convenient, but they often cost more per pound. If you have enough chickens to use the feed quickly, buying larger bags or bulk feed can reduce the price of every egg your hens produce. This is not always dramatic, but it can be meaningful. A few dollars saved per bag may not sound like much in 1 week, but across months of feeding, especially with a larger flock, those small savings can become a real difference. However, bulk buying only works if you can store the feed correctly. Feed should be kept dry, cool, and protected from rodents. Moisture is the enemy. Once feed becomes damp, it can mold, and moldy feed should never be given to chickens. Heat and oxygen can also reduce quality over time, especially in feeds that contain oils or ground grains. So before buying a huge amount, ask one simple question. Can the flock eat this before the feed loses quality? For many backyard keepers, buying several months of feed may sound smart, but if the feed sits too long, the savings disappear. A cheaper bag is not cheaper if part of it goes stale, rancid, or unsafe. If your flock is too small for bulk buying, there is another option: a feed co-op. This simply means several people combine their orders so they can access a better price together. One person may not need hundreds of pounds of feed, but 5 or 10 chicken keepers together might. You can organize this with neighbors, local homesteaders, small farmers, or poultry groups in your area. Another strategy is to simplify the feed system where possible. For example, some chicken keepers use one basic feed for different groups, then supplement specific needs separately. Laying hens, for instance, need extra calcium for strong eggshells. That calcium can be offered separately through oyster shell or clean crushed eggshells, so the hens can take what they need. The point is not to buy the biggest amount possible. The point is to buy the smartest amount possible. Fresh feed, safely stored, at a lower price per pound. That is where the savings are. The sixth way to reduce your chicken feed bill is to remember what chickens are designed to do. They are not meant to stand beside a feeder all day and wait for pellets. They are foragers. A chicken naturally scratches, pecks, searches, digs, and investigates. If you give chickens access to pasture, yard space, or rotated ground, they can find part of their own diet there. Grass tips, weed seeds, tiny insects, worms, beetles, fly larvae, fallen fruit, soft plant material. None of these things replaces a balanced ration completely, but they can reduce how much purchased feed the flock needs, especially during the growing season. This is why pasture, yard rotation, and movable fencing can make such a difference. Instead of keeping chickens in one bare pen until the ground turns to dirt, you move them across fresh areas. That movement gives them new forage while also protecting the land from being overworked. Chickens get stimulation and natural forage. The soil gets manure. The old area gets time to recover. Even a small backyard can use this idea. You do not need a huge farm. You can divide the yard into zones, use temporary fencing, or create a simple rotation where chickens spend limited time in one section before moving to the next. A mobile coop or chicken tractor can also work well for smaller flocks, especially if predators are a concern. The more fresh ground the flock can access, the more it can contribute to its own diet. But there is a balance. Free-ranging sounds simple, but it is not safe everywhere. Dogs, hawks, foxes, snakes, traffic, neighbors, and garden damage can all become problems. In some places, full free range is not realistic. In that case, controlled access is better than uncontrolled risk. A fenced rotation system gives you more control. You can decide where the chickens go, how long they stay, and how much pressure they put on the land. If the grass disappears, the soil becomes muddy, or droppings build up heavily, the flock has stayed too long. If there is still plenty of green growth and insect activity, the area may support them longer. This is where observation matters. Chickens on rich pasture may need less feed than chickens in a bare run. Chickens following livestock, compost piles, or garden cleanup areas may find even more protein from insects and larvae. But chickens in winter, dry seasons, or urban yards with little vegetation may still depend heavily on purchased feed. So do not copy someone else's numbers blindly. Watch your flock. Watch the ground. Watch the egg basket. If the flock is active, healthy, maintaining weight, and laying well, your system is probably working. If egg production drops sharply, chickens look thin, or they seem desperate around the feeder, they may need more feed. Pasture is not free in the sense that it requires planning. But compared with buying every calorie in a bag, letting chickens harvest part of their own diet is one of the most natural ways to lower costs. The seventh way to reduce your chicken feed bill is to stop guessing and start testing. Because here is the problem. One person may say their chickens only need a tiny amount of feed because they free range all day. Another person may say their hens need a full ration every single day or egg production drops. Both people might be telling the truth, because their systems are not the same. Different land, different seasons, different breeds, different flock sizes, different predators, different access to insects, grass, compost, and garden waste. So instead of copying someone else's feeding schedule, use what I like to call the 10% test. Start with the amount you are currently feeding. Write it down. Then write down your average egg production for the week. Do not judge by one single day, because hens naturally fluctuate. Look at the weekly pattern. Now, reduce the purchased feed by about 10%. Not 50, not 30, just 10. Keep everything else as consistent as possible. If the flock is on pasture, move it the same way. If you are feeding kitchen scraps, keep the scraps similar. If you are continue soaking it, the goal is to test one change at a time, not confuse the results. Then watch the flock for a full week. Count the eggs. Watch the flock. Look at body condition. Notice whether the chickens are active and alert, or whether they seem stressed and frantic around food. Pay attention to shell quality as well. Thin shells, sudden production drops, weight loss, or aggressive competition at feeding time can all be signs that you have reduced too far. If everything stays stable, you can try another 10% reduction the next week. Again, watch the results. At some point, you may find the line. Maybe egg production stays almost the same even with less commercial feed because the chickens are getting enough from pasture, kitchen scraps, and garden greens. Or maybe production drops quickly because your flock depends more heavily on commercial feed than you thought. That information is valuable. It tells you what your system can actually support. And if you reduce feed and the results become uncomfortable, simply go back to the previous level where the flock was doing well. That is not failure, that is data. This method is especially helpful because feed savings are not always worth the trade-off. For example, if reducing feed saves a little money but cuts egg production in half, it may not be a real saving. But if you can reduce feed by 10 or 20% with little change in egg production, that is a win. The goal is not to force chickens to produce onto little food. The goal is to find the most efficient point, enough nutrition for healthy chickens, enough production to make the flock worthwhile, and no unnecessary feed being wasted every day. That is how you reduce costs with confidence instead of hope. So, let's bring everything together. Cutting your chicken feed bill is not about one magic trick. It is about building a smarter feeding system. First, use safe kitchen scraps, not spoiled food, not moldy food, not random garbage, but real scraps that still have value. Second, use the garden, extra grains, overgrown vegetables, bruised fruit, squash, pumpkins, and plant trimmings can all help reduce the pressure on the feed bag. Third, measure the feed ration. If you do not know how much feed is going into the flock, you cannot know how much is being wasted. Fourth, soak or lightly ferment the feed when it makes sense. This can reduce dust, limit waste, improve texture, and help chickens use the feed more efficiently. Fifth, buy smarter. Larger bags, bulk orders, or local group buying can reduce the price per pound as long as the feed is stored safely and used while it is still fresh. Sixth, give chickens access to pasture, yard rotation, or controlled foraging areas when possible. Pasture, garden cleanup areas, and controlled foraging allow the flock to harvest some of its own food. And seventh, test your system slowly. Reduce feed by small amounts, track egg production, watch the flock, and let the chickens show you where the limit is. The important thing is not to do everything perfectly from day one. Start with the easiest change. Measure the feed. Save safe kitchen scraps. Grow a little extra green food. Move the flock to fresh ground if you can. Then build from there. A chicken system becomes expensive when every calorie has to come from a purchase bag, but it becomes more resilient when feed comes from many places: the kitchen, the garden, the yard, the soil, insects, and smart buying habits. That is the real lesson. Do not simply feed less. Feed more intelligently. And design the system so waste becomes food, food becomes eggs, and every bag of feed goes further than it did before.